out the office space up at Public Works, the unfinished space up there for $100,000, and another $100,000 to redo community development for investigations. Whether that works, whether it's a start, but those are monies that we have available right now to begin doing that. So that's where we are today. Option number one for you, and this gets back to Mr. Lanis's question. If you wanted to, and I just assumed if you wanted to next year, we talked about a CIP bond, and I gave you the provisions for issuing a CIP bond with, you can do that for, public facilities and that, and make those expenditures. How does it work? $600,000 would be the annual cost of the debt service for $7.5 million CIP bond. Okay. What we had planned in the capital improvements plan. So assuming you adopt the budget and based upon the recommendations we have on page 10, we were assuming a $200,000 expenditure in 12, $100,000 in 13, $200,000 in 14, $100,000 in 15. Therefore, it gets down to the question that Mr. Lanis asked. How much are you going to need to increase the levy? Based on what we have, you won't have to increase the levy anything in 2012. In 2013, you'll need about $300,000. To answer your question, what's the impact? About 1.67% would be what you would have to increase the levy. Or, as I put in brackets, you may want to cut expenditures somewhere else. Again, that's a discussion that you wouldn't have to have until 1 year from now. Again, moving out, you'd then need to increase that, add another $100,000 onto that in 14, so that you're paying the $400,000 per year. In 15, you'd have to add another $100,000 again on top of that, so you're now $500,000, and then not until 2016 would you need the full $600,000. And as we're making those incremental steps, $100,000 is a little less than about 0.5% tax levy increase. Obviously, it compounds upon itself each year. Just for your consideration, how does it work? And certainly the chief is going to kick me under the table, but certainly if you want to talk about a smaller version and not do the $3 million parking or something else, save money on that. Same thing, only that scenario is $350,000. Again, we have the money planned in the CIP, the basis of your recommendations. Then again, you would need no new money next year. In 2013, you'd need about $50,000. That's about a 0.3%. And certainly we have, as you know, when we go through the money and the budget and plus and minuses before and after, then again, increasing by $100,000 a year until we get up to the $350,000 in 2016. Under this scenario, again, that's about a 2% levy increase by the time you get to 2016. So those are that's really the numbers you're talking about. This is really the way we would phase this. You're really not, the way we have money set aside, we're really ramping up for 3 to 5 years before we would really be paying the full extent on the bonds, making it available. And so those really, for your discussion, obviously for you, you need to decide on the CIP side. Certainly there's the referendum discussion issue that you want to have, but as you move through this, you certainly have the numbers of what it's going to cost you. So available for questions on just how we would fund it and what we have built at this point in time.
We have a couple of questions. Chuck, could you tell us what this sort of open space is just to the south of the salt shed?
Yes, that's right now a very full stormwater pond.
Yeah.
So that's what keeps this site from flooding. Council, it's one of the ways we keep, it's always tough to find a location for a maintenance yard. It's one of those things you need when you're on a city and a public works department, but nobody wants to see it, and it's gravel, and when it rains, the gravel runs off. So that is our way of keep the gravel into that spot instead of going down into Wicklander Pond. And when it dries out, hopefully it will some point this year, we'll go in and excavate all that gravel out, dry it out, and reuse it. So it's really a necessary feature for having a maintenance yard.
Can't build a garage on top of that?
You could, certainly with the right amount of money, but we'd certainly need a lot, and it would have to be on top.
Marv, do you have a question or comment?
You got me sidetracked in that conversation there. I guess the other thing is, because we're going to be talking about a new fire station in the future too. So how do we tie these together and space them out? And if we're going to try to do a bond referendum?
Mayor and Council, again, the fire stations, as we have within our capital improvements plan, number one, I hate to use the word, but assuming you adopt the capital improvements plan, the fire stations are in there. You certainly will have to fund the levy, but the numbers that are on page 10 will fund that. In addition, we are having discussions with 3M about some other options that we hope to bring back that will reduce that expense. We don't have anything to build on at this point in time. We don't know, but we think that will help, or some cooperative efforts with 3M will allow us to build a lot of fire station with some very limited amounts of funds from the taxpayers.
You could also throw into that same question, Marv, that we have a community center that needs a lot of work. And although in this plan we're addressing a big chunk of City Hall, the rest of it also needs some work also, if nothing else, like carpet and that kind of stuff. So at some point we should get the big chart so that we make sure that we're not going, oh, well, it's only an extra 1%, when we're only looking at one part of the big package.
We should be looking at the whole picture.
Mayor and Council, we'll certainly do that. Certainly we're talking about a lot of major expenditures that are in the plan over the next 5 years to 10 years, and we will put that together for you.
John?
Well, you guys have covered a lot of what I was just going to bring up in terms of particularly the fire stations and the other things, and being concerned about adding the small percentages of each and coming up with some potentially really large, kind of shocking, if it's not done over a suitable length of time. I certainly understand the need and the impulse to do it all fully. The question that I have about the parking side, and I do see certainly the great amount of value in that, and that is worthwhile. But from an architectural standpoint, is that something that can be implemented separately, so that, for instance, if the other part of the remodeling were done and the $2 million-ish of the parking garage were deferred for potentially 5 years in the future or something like that, is there anything from an architectural or efficiency standpoint that would make that a really bad idea?
No, in fact, you could even, at this point in time, you could design it. You could bid it as an ad alternate. Depending on where your numbers come in, you can accept that or not accept it. It is almost, with the exception of finding another location for the locker rooms, which we have options available to us, architecturally and structurally, you could bid that separate now, bid it later. Absolutely.
Mr. Nephew, I keep coming up with new floor plan ideas every time I see Larry. And we came up with another one just before the meeting tonight. But remember, with that option that's at the top of the easel there, it has a second floor on it with the locker rooms and with the gun range. If you move the locker rooms, and this is where my limited architectural skills come out, is you run into a roof line problem because you would build that off the back of what is our existing garage space, and the roof lines don't work out real well. And Larry alluded at one point to a flat roof, and I don't like flat roofs, and I don't think anybody else does. And I'm not building this for myself, but I am building it for the community in the future, and I think flat roof is going to cause a problem somewhere down the line. But there is the roof line consideration if you change the locker room location from over that garage or over that parking area to somewhere else.
You know, it isn't exactly like our current roof line has been problem-free.
You're right.
And so I'm not a big fan of flat roofs either, but certainly there's a lot of them in commercial situations.
Maybe we should take this one off totally and go to a flat roof building.
Well, I mean, it just seems like the numbers on an annual basis, and obviously over time, you know, if it was possible to be spreading it out over a longer time and to be doing more phasing, given the other needs that we're aware of in the city's budget, it might make it a lot more palatable. But obviously you can't do that in a way that challenges, you know, the structural integrity or the basic functionality of what we're trying to do.
You know, I'm going to combine something that I thought of a couple weeks ago, along with something that Mr. Antonin just said. But it seems to me that if we wanted to get the additions kind of other than the garage area taken care of, in where the locker rooms are where right now? Okay. And so that's an area that we want to convert into something else. And so it seemed, and what I had thrown out, I had actually sent an email to Chuck and to Jim having to do with these modular building things, glorified trailers almost. And so it still seems to me that doing something like that, like for locker rooms, would be an option. And I don't even know. The locker rooms have showers, and I mean okay. And it you know, if we put a couple things out alongside the buildings so that we could get the locker room space out of our building, then we could remodel that center section and work towards getting the offices that we need set up in the building. And it just seems to me that component, the locker room component, is not something that needs to be closely tied to what's going on. And so it seems to be a way to have a holding stage where we can, you know, get the rest of it done as far as the office part goes, and then once we would get around to doing the parking facility and the new locker rooms, obviously they go away. And so that I'm combining with Jim just asked me, why can't we just build a pole barn to put the cars in? And so, you know, one, we really don't allow pole barns, so that would be one reason. But I'm assuming from everything that Chief Tamala has said is that, I mean, these are fully heated, air-conditioned spaces for the cars and whatnot. I mean, they're not. It's not cold parking, is it? I mean,
they're heated to like 50 degrees. I don't think that they're air conditioned though. They just have ventilation.
No air conditioning.
There would not be air conditioning. There would be ventilation.
Okay.
Because of the exhaust. By code, you have to ventilate the exhaust out of the building. The other thing that we were setting up, which would facilitate cooling things off in the summer, is we have a drive-through situation, so you could open up garage doors and get some through ventilation.
All right, but there would be some heat provided. I mean, that was the whole conversation about not needing to have cars sitting around idling and that type of thing.
No, typically a garage like this is just heated with individual unit heaters, natural gas, and up to 50 degrees.
Did you want to throw out another idea?
Oh, yes.
We did, before you start in, we did look and talk about a remote pole barn situation, and basically it comes down to the operationally having to run up the hill to get your car to respond to a call and those types of situations.
Well, I think that I think this is well and good. I think council is probably a little bit shocked by the numbers, as I think everybody is, and this is a good start. I don't want the council to be stampeded into this, and I know they're not going to be, but there are a number of factors at play. Just this last week, the legislature, we got $3 million in the bonding bill. With that, you take, we're planning on putting the EOC in the East Metro Fire Training Facility, but there may be an opportunity now with working with 3M where we can put in the EOC at the new fire station on the 3M campus. And I know how very important it is to have an indoor firing range, and that frees up basically a lower level of the East Metro Public Safety Training Facility, which you could put a real state-of-the-art firing range in. So I think there's a lot of different options and plans and subsets, and maybe not pole barns for parking police cars, but I don't think you have to have a Taj Mahal either to keep a car warm at 50 degrees. That I think I'm encouraged that this is at the perhaps doable level with some real tweaking and perhaps some creative financing. So even though there are very significant numbers here that I don't think is possible at this juncture, I don't think we should be put off, and we should continue to move forward, but in sort of a cost-saving mode and taking advantage of the situation as it develops.
Okay. And my thought is that I won't even say if we're going to move forward, because it would seem to me that we do have to move forward. And we should build the police station that we need to do the work that we need to do. And so if that's number 4, then that's the one that we should be building. Until we get the full picture of all these different things, because we have the training facility, 2 new fire stations, the community center, the police department, it does, when you look at it, and Jim, I think had mentioned it, it's like, how did we all of a sudden get all this stuff that we need to build within, such a short period of time? And so we need to spend a fair amount of time figuring out what the funding is going to be to do all this. But that being said, it seems like option number 4 allows us to really do some decent phasing, so at least there's the possibility of being able to move forward and be making some of the improvements. And I would agree with Mr. Nephew that it could well be that the parking segment, which is really a big chunk, waits, and that's the last piece, because it would seem most important to me to have the personnel functioning as they need to, and then we'll last worry about our cars. And so that's where I'm seeing it at this point as we kind of sit here today. Kathy?
Well, actually, I wasn't shocked at the numbers. I don't think they're nice numbers, but I wasn't shocked. They're real numbers. I agree with what you just said. My only, and I don't know that we can solve that, but to me the locker room issue is a much bigger deal than it might be to some other people when you realize what role it plays in the average cop's life in the average day. That has to be addressed fairly soon, and whether it's done in the fashion that Will suggested, very temporarily or not, that has to be part of this reorganization thing, because it's part of what the hang-up is for working conditions over there. So we need to find some good way to address the locker room situation and the critical officing. I totally agree. And to answer your rhetorical question, I'll answer it anyway. How did we get here? I think I'll say what I used to say to Eric when he sat here. It's like when you occupy one of these seats as a new guy, you realize that you're inheriting everything everybody before you did, whether it was good or bad. And there has been some procrastinating in the past here, so we won't go there. But that's how we got the community center and the fire stations and the police department expansion all at one time. Because the police department visionary look-ahead planning thing was first discussed when I was actually occupying, I believe it was your chair, right after I was sworn in 2002. So this has been rumbling around with people not addressing it for a long time. So we just got stuck being the group that got to address it. Also at a time when money happens to be an issue. Fun, it's just too much fun. But I really do think that's how it happened, which is why I've wanted to address the community center like I have, and why I want to address this, as you said correctly, with an option that we can do and phase, but phase it where as you finish a phase, you've done something that really works now and won't continue to work, or there's no point in starting to rip the place up. Because whether we do it or not, it needs doing, and someone after us will have to try and piece it together or make some other stupid mistake, which we don't need to do any more of. So I know money's always the issue, and I'm certainly not into spending millions at a time if I don't have to, but I do think we have to look at all the options of how we can combine what we can and fund what we need to fund. But this is, there ain't no going back, as I said. I don't think we just say, well, that looks nice, but, we can't afford to do that. I am there. We cannot afford not to. We cannot afford not to. We don't have years of having a solid police department that everybody in the area respects by making them continue to operate over on Frost Avenue. That's one of the reasons they moved to this building. Council chambers was too little, but the police department was a joke. So they made the commitment by coming here, albeit not quite as right as they should have, and we need to carry that forward now that we're this far. And so this is I think, our decision about what they made the decision to move off of Frost Avenue. We're at the same kind of a juncture. Things have changed to the point where we need to commit to doing it. We just need to find the most sensible thing we can and move it forward.
And so just to be clear, I talk about like a modular building or something is just my effort to try to solve the locker room problem as quickly as we possibly can. John?
I had a couple of lots of agreement with what's been said, but just a couple specific questions, again, on the spreadsheet. I'm just looking for explanation to better understand a couple of the details. I get the construction contingency. I'm familiar with seeing that in road projects and the like, but I don't, I'm wondering what exactly those percentages under other get applied to. It says 15% design contingency, 11% RS means LOC period factor, location. I'm not sure what that means. So that one in particular, and explain exactly what elements of the cost estimates those get applied to.
We use for budgeting purposes at this stage or at this level of design, we use a manual called RS means, which gives us construction cost factors for all the different types of buildings or components of buildings. So
that's kind of like a construction index.
Correct. So what the 11% RS means location factor is RS means this manual is produced for the whole country. And then depending on where you are in the country, you take that baseline figure and you have a multiplier that you put to it to get a more accurate cost for your area. Some areas are 0, some are 20% higher. Minneapolis and St. Paul specifically is 11% factor above their cost. So that's what that factor is.
Okay, so that means that the rest of your estimates are based on the RS means baseline,
correct.
And then this is the adjustment to account for what the costs in our metro area are.
Correct.
Specifically in St. Paul.
Correct.
Okay.
And they are typically conservative estimates, so I'm pretty confident that, we can do it there. The 15% design contingency, again, is based on where we are at in the process, in that we have not delved deeply into the building yet to know exactly what we need to do with ductwork or what we need to do with electrical work. We have an assumption, but this just gives us a little contingency to deal with things that we run across in as we go down the line. Our goal is by the time we're done with construction documents, where we're going out ready to bid, that number is eliminated. So it's a factor that we're trying to deal, but for budgeting purposes at this level, it gives us a little bit of room.
Kind of the fudge factor for that.
Correct.
And then the construction contingency, that presumably would be for change orders and things that arise.
Correct.
As you're actually on the job and the contractor says you have to pay more because the bid didn't include needing to do this particular.
It's more of, it's a contingency for a lot of things. As you get into the project, you might decide that, for instance, we can get carpet for the entire building at this rate buying bulk, so if we add a little bit more money, we can recarpet the whole building. It might be for running into unforeseen conditions when you start digging. We can do soil borings as best we can in locations that we can, but literally until you start digging, you don't know exactly what you're running into. I'll give you a good example. Several years ago, doing a justice facility in Little Falls, we had soil borings all over the place, and including where the elevator was supposed to go. The elevator literally, through the final parts of design, shifted 15 or 20 feet, and when we started to bore the hole for the shaft, we hit a finger of granite that was sticking up, and literally the shaft, we couldn't figure out why it was taking so long to drill, and literally it bent the drill bit and skewed the hole, and so we had to go back and redo that. So it's things like that that you run in during construction. So it's not necessarily all bad things, as sometimes it's good things where you decide to add a little bit to the project for whatever reasons.
Mayor and Council, respecting your time this evening, just to be sure, I think we've got direction from you on the options looking towards 3 and 4. We certainly got direction. We'll bring back kind of the issue of, remember, we just a few months ago started this idea of reducing on a permanent basis our operating costs and then moving that over to how we would fund all of these major projects, and that's very, very complicated. And so we're going to take 4 to 6, maybe 8 weeks, put all that together, give you a bigger picture, and bring it back to a work session late September, early October.
Kathy, did you have something else?
Well, I was just going to say, I think to this point, though, this has been one of the better things that we've done, where we said, let's look at this and get some vision of where we need to go, and if it's doable. This has been a very good thing, and to me it feels more solid than many other things we've attempted to jumpstart. So we know we have an obligation, we know we need to make a commitment, and we have some vision of what that might entail. So I think this has gone very well. And then flip that will add, when you're talking about drilling and soil borings, take note of where we are. There's a hill out there. There's a hill out there with runoff from the county. There's a wetland right over there. I'm just saying.
And that's probably why there's no basement.
Yeah, soil issues here could be.
Do you have anything else, Mr. Cook?
I do not. As Mr. All said, we're looking for kind of some general direction, and we'll go back and kind of refine that, and hopefully refine the dollars and financing and the big picture.
Thank you very much.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, then we can get back to some budget stuff. And so, according to my list, the IT department.
Mayor, actually, I get to kick it off, talk about the bigger picture.
Okay,
on
bigger
the budget.
picture.
Sorry.
Doesn't say on here that we're doing any bigger
I know.
picture.
We should have been clearer on that, so we'll work on that in the future with our agenda. But the idea, just kind of the guidance, Ms. Guilfoyle would have been after this, but this is kind of the introduction. So if I can have the overhead, council, again, the overhead slides, I passed out copies this evening, but I'm going to work through this fairly quickly. And really where we are tonight is, I'll get going here, is talking about the process. Obviously, February 4th was the retreat. We had the CIP on the 23rd, and now we're starting the presentations. The idea, again, council, is for you to kind of keep score on page 10, and each of the recommendations that are there, whether you agree. For instance, the IT department's going to go first. You will see there's really, we're recommending no adjustments. Now, the IT department, has charges to everyone else. If you want to fund more things in the IT, that means everybody else's budget either has to get cut or you have to come up with new money. Conversely, if you want to cut Michael Folds' department, which we're not recommending, that could save money through the other areas. And so at this point in time, as you hear each of these presentations and you say, yes, we agree with staff, certainly that's fine, then you can fill that in. If you disagree, we would ask that you provide us that direction. You're going to hear from Michael, then I'll do exec, legislative, and community development. You heard from Karen on citizen services, and we'll try to get you out of here in about 15, 20 minutes. Police and fire finance will be at the work session next Monday, and in 3 weeks you'll hear Dewey on Park and Rec, MCC, and Michael Thompson on Public Works. And then on the 29th, we will have the discussion where our intent is to have that entire page 10 filled out by you, giving us direction on how that all works. And we expect that then September 12th, you'll be setting your maximum levy.
Excuse me, do we have to do something on page 10, did you say?
Yeah, well, no, you don't have to do anything.
I think you only said that about 6 times.
Right. Okay, I'll try not to repeat that more than 3 or 4 more times. So, again, financial sustainability was one of your goals. It's on the back of your packet. But principles of sustainability is what we're talking about in putting all those all together. I won't review that, but you did talk about evaluate and implement facility improvements into infrastructure costs. That's what we're doing. And like you said, there's a long list of them, and we just got done with that discussion tonight, what we're trying to put together. I'll talk about the levy. But clearly what we need to talk about and get you more information on is we are reducing operating costs in order to shift that to fund our capital projects. So how you understand that and what you look at. So again, I hate to go back to page 10, but where you see cuts in each of the departments, that's commonly referred to as shifts. So shifts or cuts or reductions, whatever you want to know. That's the key thing that we're doing tonight. And so when you hear about recommended reductions, we are shifting those costs to pay for capital projects. And so we're going to go through that in detail. I want to go through this fairly quickly. This is where, just for sure, where the 2010, or excuse me, how your 2011 levy dollars were used for the community center, debt service, rec programs, and the general fund. We do not have anything for ambulance, and you're going to hear from Steve about the need to do that. We took money out of the capital improvements projects fund over the last 3 years in order to balance the budget. We need to put money back in there because that's literally what we're talking about, how we're funding the police department things. So fire truck we talked about, you're going to hear about that, and park development has zero money. Our total levy in 2011 is $17.5 million. Now, let's talk about impact of something that just happened in the last 2 weeks, and that is the settlement that happened in the legislature. And I'm going to walk through this and try to simplify this as much as possible. And actually, this was not in your packet. Gail and I just worked this up Thursday and Friday, and try to explain it this way. So, our 2011 levy was $17.5 million. Okay. Last year, and again this year, what we assumed is that we would collect 93.5% of what you approved for a levy. So that's $16.365 million. So while you passed a levy at 17.5, we only received 16.3 million. The reason being, part of it, about half of it nearly, was market value homestead credit, where the state said, nah, property owners, never mind, you don't have to pay that percentage, we'll pay it for you.
Sure.
Then the state didn't, okay? So it impacted our, quote, collection rate. Now certainly, Gail will tell you that financing is much more complicated than that, but for me, it helps to look at the collection rate. Now, what happens in 12? With the legislature and the governor's agreement that got approved, the market value homestead credit program was eliminated. So the impacts out of that are, in order for the property owners not to be hurt, the market value homestead property owners, credit is given to those homes. And therefore, the legislature says, we will shift that tax to the non-homestead properties. Thus, really what happens for Maplewood is in 2012, our collection rate increases. So, should this have happened last year, our estimated collection rate would actually have been at 96.5%. In other words, we would have received 96.5% of what we levied, $16.89 million. So what's the impact in 2012 as you move forward? Again, a major assumptions, we have no information, but if nobody's market value changed, everybody was the same, nobody's went up or down or improvements were made, if nothing happened, obviously all homestead properties would see a 0% based upon that. So if you increase the levy 0, if you didn't do anything at all, homestead properties would be there. However, all non-homestead properties will see about a 3% tax increase, and the city of Maplewood will benefit to the tune of $525,000. Okay? Let me run through that one more time on the next slide and show that again, because it's difficult to understand. If there are no market value changes, one, homestead properties, the property owners, the people in the city with homestead properties, the residents, which we give you information on values of home, the $150,000 home, the $200,000, all of those up. They're not going to see an impact from that. But those non-homesteads, the commercial, the industrial, all the apartment buildings are going to see a 3% increase, and we as a city are going to see a $525,000 increase. I'll go through this and then I'll answer questions when we're done, because I know how that is. Other impacts to, and I'm going to go back to page 10, is the county has decided and slipped into legislation, not just Ramsey, but all counties, that medical assistance will be all that we can receive for ambulance calls for their type of facilities, specifically the work farm, the corrections farm. City cost to us, you as a council will have to come up with an additional $150,000. So while it's good news, you got $525 on one hand, it's going to cost you $150 on the other. Mr. Lannis and I, along with Gail, met with Tartan Arena. On your budget sheet, you saw that we were recommending $50,000 for Tartan, based upon the bonds that will expire in 2017. They think they can defease those and move some money around, that we don't need money to establish a Tartan Arena fund. And so on page 10, you can fill in where it says $50,000 recommendation from the staff. We'll fill one in, and we've changed our recommendation to 0 on that. So that's a $50,000 gain. So how does that work? The net impact to us as a city with the legislation and those changes are $425,000. So while we were recommending $854 before, as a staff, the new revenue needed is $429,387, or 2.45%. However, that is homestead properties. Remember, you have to add 3% on top of that to the non-homestead property owners. So with that, I certainly will take a breath and ask if there are questions to how that changes some of the assumptions.
Two questions. The first one is on the statement about it being a 0% impact on homestead property if market values don't change. I guess my understanding, and maybe I'm confused on this, but my understanding is that there was likely to be some change, that people would see slightly less benefit from the new calculation than they did under the old, but this is just kind of for our keeping it simple?
Mayor and Council, exactly, because as values changed, absolutely. The higher your value, the more likely you're going to see.
And I had an understanding
but the credits aren't going to be there.
But the state was saving some money out of this along the way, too.
I'm simplifying this way beyond what actually occurred.
And then the other question I had essentially is, and I appreciate coming to the 2.45% number, because we're accustomed to just setting the levy, not the levy net of anticipated collection rates and so forth. As we move forward, are we going to be looking at the kind of number that we have on the sheet right now, or is that going to be amended to reflect this change due to MVHC? I mean, are we still going to be talking about our top line levy, but then we'll have to have an add-in of, say, $525,000 to account for what previously was unpaid MVHC?
Mayor and Council, we certainly can do as you would like, but our intent would to try to keep track for you as we go along and make this change accordingly. But because it kind of comes down to a policy decision for you, property owners, are everybody, commercial, industrial, apartment owners. But the way we've done budgets over the last 10 years that I've been here is told you about what the impact on homeowners, homesteaded property. You'll get a list of, okay, the $150,000 home, and what's the impact on the $250,000 home, and the $500,000 home. They're all homesteaded. So we've never really given you a huge impact. In addition, the other thing that we're going to bring to you is an impact and a trend. Remember, what's happened over the last 10 years is the percentage of your property taxes paid for by residential has skyrocketed. It's up dramatically, and why is that? Because in the early 2000s, our home values were going up 20% per year, where commercial industrial apartments were only going up 3% a year. So we're starting to shift back, and we're really not even back to where we were in 2001, 2002. And so we're going to give you all that information. I know it's a long answer, Mr. Nephew, but really we're going to try to track that, but you really have to understand that a 0% to residential is going to also equate to a higher value to the other properties.
Well, and I guess that I know it's very helpful when we get to the point of evaluating the levy decision to get as clear an idea as possible about its impact on an individual property owner and on typical home and business owners. But I see a lot of potential for confusion in just as we're talking about different numbers on these sheets and so forth. And so I don't know if maybe we just need to have the next version of our spreadsheet with lines to have a line in that just says, accounting for MVHC, so that we're still looking at what the number is on the bottom line for the levy.
And again, we will do that as long as you understand that it's a savings.
Right. And so
and
even if that number
Thursday
was,
and Friday after we wrote this report, Gail and I put it together.
Even if we came to that bottom line and said, well, we're going to set the maximum levy to be $17.5 million, just like last year, that would still mean property tax increases on certain properties because of the way the calculations were being changed. But there's some truth to that every year because of changes in valuation, whether or not people challenge their assessments and all those things that also don't necessarily mean that we collect the money that we charge when we set the levy in the first place.
Mr. Antonin?
Thank you, Mayor. I think, there we go. I think we have to understand that, we'll put that in there, but I think we want to keep it as simple as possible so that we don't lose track. But bear in mind, this is nothing that we've cooked up, that Gail or Chuck, and we just did some examination of what the legislature did in their elimination of the market value homestead credit. And this was brought about nothing that we had done. We're just reflecting the changes in state legislation. And I think it's very important that we try to keep the same message to our citizens, recognizing that, yes, there will be some increase for non-homestead credit properties, but we've always put the context on the homestead property as to what an increase would be, what the levy amount, the percentage, et cetera. And I think we have to keep that general genre so that we don't confuse people. And again, remind people that this is nothing that the city has done against them. We're just reflecting changes in state tax policy and state, statute.
If I could follow up, just to offer an opinion on it, I think overall I like the fact that the old program is being eliminated, because it was a budgetary nightmare for us, because we would have to include it when we did our budgets, but we didn't necessarily know until 3 days before the end of the fiscal year if we were actually going to get that money. And so I think that it breeds confusion this year, just because it's going to have to be a change in how we're looking at it, and it makes it difficult to compare one year to the other. And obviously we can't regard this as $500,000 of strings, no strings money that fell from the sky for us to spend. I'm happy that we're not doing that. But going forward, it will make for a more accurate and more sensible relationship between what we talk about in budgeting and what actually happens in the following year.
Kathy?
This is about the ambulance question. Two things. How did the counties manage to pull this off with nobody knowing they were pulling it off, other than its county? And this is kind of one of the things that has always irritated me about county government. It's like they're your friends as long as you don't back up toward the blade and the knife. And is there any chance that we are going to have some response from them? Do we know that says, look, are you serious, and what are you going to do about it?
Jim?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. What happened was that this has been a burr under the saddle of Anoka County for many years.
Well.
And what happened was they were able to convince a legislative committee. I guess supposedly they had a hearing, but the League of Cities, I didn't hear anything about it. I didn't hear anything about it from the Municipal Legislative Commission, from Metro Cities, which we are tasked to go over the legislature. And I'm going to have a little chat with those folks later. But what happened was they were able to get it through the committee that it was all counties. Again, it was a Anoka initiative, and I did talk with Ramsey County about this. We had a few choice words, and what I suggested is fine that the counties did that, but it doesn't apply to Ramsey County. We can have an agreement with Ramsey County to cover our costs for ambulance services to the workhouse. And if you think about it, it's not fair for the citizens of Maplewood to be totally subsidizing the prisoners or the ne'er-do-wells at the workhouse. That's a function of the county. And so we can have an agreement with them, provided they're willing to cover our costs. Now, Steve Luke and the fire chief is going to be meeting with the sheriff. Also, we're taking a multi-pronged approach. We want to get the lay of the land first, but then we're going to want to have the mayor and council perhaps visit with our county commissioners and say, maybe it would be a good idea to have this agreement, because there are a lot of services that Maplewood provides, and I don't think we want to get to the point of where, okay, you did this to us, or we're going to do this to you. I mean,
speak for yourself.
It's shifting the burden, and so it's
right.
It's totally.
And we already have a number I think, the highest number of county facilities in this city outside of the city of St. Paul. So we're already providing a lot of services to the county just because they're a government entity.
And we're not, and for once, we're not alone in this. St. Paul is really involved in this. Now, the key point is, this is corrections.
Right.
And what happens if, detox, that's in St. Paul. If that applies to detox, that St. Paul could be in much, much worse shape as far as their emergency medical services go than us. So at least we're in lockstep with St. Paul on this.
But just on principle, it's like,
yeah,
come on, really? I mean, because I've had this conversation over the years, even before I sat here, with county officials. It's like, okay, it's always nice to be a good neighbor and everything, but do you want to count them up?
Well, that's the point. In the word shift, there is an F.
Yes, I know.
Otherwise,
that's what I asked you before.
You get the direction of what happened to us.
Yes.
So somewhere here, did we have a budget discussion going on?
Mayor and council, I'll pick it up again. That was the intent there.
It is, because I want to know if we could do something like that, because it's a substantial amount of money. That's all I'm saying.
Mayor and council, the intent there was so you understand the market value homestead credit, those other issues. Well, the ambulance fund will be talked on the 8th when Steve is here and does his presentation talking about that. So as long as you understand that, that's not a decision, it's more information. So if we can go back to the overhead, I'll zip through here, we'll get Michael started and finish up. And so we were here, and again, new revenue needed is now 429. Very quickly, again, I don't want to go through this, but you know which page this all comes from, so I'm not even going to spend any time at all on those. We're just going to go through that page real quickly. The fund balance discussion is there. The employee benefits fund is something you need to discuss. But council, just so you understand, as we look at this year, that 100,000 could be zero, depending upon how we end 2011. This number, as what we're working on with the employee benefits fund, that could be zero. So if you go back to we're now down to the original number, I think was 854. We're now at 429, and you take off this 100,000 and that 126, you can see we're down at the 1% in that category. And all of that, with that previous page that I went through real quickly, funds a lot of the police and fire facilities and MCC. So those are the big discussion points. We talked about Taste of Maplewood. So with that, IT department's going to talk about that. I think for some reason you didn't get on the list. I'm not sure on page 10. Whoops, there's that page 10 again. But the idea was zero for that department. And I think I lost the screen, so we won't go through any of the rest of that. I'm back? Okay. Executive tonight, we're going to talk about a $24,000 reduction. Legislative, $8,850. Community development, $49,860. Then the rest of the departments are going to show up. Citizen services was no reduction. Finance, no reduction. Fire, 114. Police, 179. Parks, no reduction. Public Works, 129. So you're going to hear about all of those over the next 3 weeks, and then we're going to come back. And so on the 12th, you'll make the decision, but obviously your final budget will be in December. So I think that's my introduction. I think I can finally turn it over to Michael to talk about the IT department, and then I'll come back and finish up exec, legislative, and community development.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I don't have anything nearly as exciting as an indoor gun range to talk to you about tonight, but I do want to apologize initially for not having the attachments to the memo in the packet. I was kind of had a little brain fade and thought finance was going to do it. So I apologize about that. We will touch on it during the presentation here, and it will be, I do have all the pages done, and I can certainly forward those to you, so I apologize about that. With that, if I can have this presentation. First, our org chart, again, it hasn't changed very much over the last couple of years. Myself, we have 3 full-time employees and 3 part-time employees. Myself, Nick Franzen, who is our systems analyst, Chad Burgo, GIS analyst. We have 3 part-time video technicians, and then currently we have vacant an IT technician position, which we look to hopefully fill in 2011, and I'll speak to that here in a little bit. In previous years, it was asked if we could see just a visual representation of where the IT department or the IT fund is funded from the most. And again, it's difficult to see the numbers on that, but if you look at the pie chart, the whole right side is public safety. So we're funded about 50% by public safety, and with that, I guess we assume that they get 50% of our services as well. Chief Tamala spoke to it earlier. I looked up when he was looking, I believe they have close to 60 PCs, 15, 20 printers, and many, many software applications that they use, which continues to increase, and we're going to talk about that also a little bit later. Touch on our CIP projects, or lack thereof, very quickly. One of them was the phone system, and through some one-time money that we had earlier in the year and the authorization to use that this past month, we're currently implementing that actually, so that has been removed from the CIP plan. The other one was some fiber optics that we were running to connect up some of our remote sites, and through working with some neighboring communities, City of Roseville, City of North St. Paul, we've kind of formed some partnerships and entered in some different, I guess, projects with them. So we don't need to have that as a CIP project anymore. We may still have some last mile runs that we'll have to find some money for, but it's not over that $50,000 for the CIP. So we're very happy about that also. That was a big ticket item. Moving on, and here's where I talked about earlier that you did not have in your packet. Comparing 2011 budget to our proposed 2012, personnel services, we see an increase in that, and part of that is in part just due to steps for some of our employees still, and then also we've transferred $40,000 from contractual services up to personnel services. As you remember from last year's budget talks, we talked about funding some dollars to pay for part-time employee or our hours from the City of Roseville for help desk staff. Through working with them this year, it's kind of been decided that we have an immediate need. You've heard me talk about this for years, and we're at a point where we just need to act, and we need to get some more help in here. We've decided to, working with the City of Roseville, that it'd be better for us to hire that employee and then just kind of flip-flop the arrangement. And with our shared services agreement that you signed a couple of weeks ago, or that was approved a couple of weeks ago, that lays the groundwork, much like the engineering department, to share services both ways. So with that employee, we'll look to get some reimbursement or some revenue for that employee, which would allow us to have them be at a full-time status. Moving down, commodities stays basically the same, and again, that funds the bulk of our hardware replacements, networking equipment, phones I talked about earlier, a lot of the equipment that's within our budget. Contractual services, you see a reduction there, albeit not the $40,000 that was moved up top. We did see an increase there on some software services or some software maintenance agreements, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. Depreciation, we see a reduction in depreciation again this year, which basically comes down to the fact that we are not buying as much or as many high-ticket items anymore. We looked at the depreciation schedule, and I don't see it going much below that, so unfortunately we can't rely on that in future years, but we are looking to. It's a good thing that we start to fund that depreciation again and start to build up that IT fund balance, so that we don't have to come back to you and look to the general fund or look to one-time money for some of these higher ticket items. So hopefully 5, 6, 8 years down the road, we'll have a fund balance where we can fund some of those projects through that. So if you see at the bottom the total overall budget, we have an increase or a proposed increase of 1% this year. Moving on, just wanted to touch really quick on the priorities. We've touched on a couple of them already. Filling that IT technician position, and we're seeing it more than ever right now as we roll out some of these larger projects. the phones is a huge project, and it's unfortunately, we have to work on that, so we see some of these help desk tickets that just kind of lay there by the wayside, and it's not, our goal for response time is 24 hours, and that's really become kind of an unreasonable goal at this point. So we'd like to get back to that point where we can have an expectation of that 24 hours response time. And again, this assumes with some revenue from the city of Roseville. We don't have anything signed yet, but through discussions with them, I'm very confident that we will get some revenue from that down the road. The next one was the increased need for funding of software support, and that's where I talked about before on the previous slide, the contractual services, the increase in that. This isn't a part of our budget where we don't have